On both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have sung the liturgical poem, Unetane Tokef. We sung it today. Unetane Tokef Kedushat Hayom. In this piyut, we imagine a decree, a gzeirah, has come down from on high that determines our fate, who shall live and who shall die, who by fire and who by water. And the poem tries to capture the experience of having part of our lives dictated by force beyond our control, which is familiar to all of us. We receive a diagnosis that feels like a gzeirah. We lose jobs and are required to relocate at inopportune times in our lives, gzeirah, that we must obey because we are reliant on the source of it for our livelihood. A loved one dies, and we are decreed to live a lifetime without them, a gzeirah. The very fact of climate change, a gzeirah, with which we are all trying to cope every day. Sometimes the gzeirah comes from God, from the universe, and sometimes it comes from another source of authority in our lives. But what is common between them is our lack of agency when it comes. A gzeirah is handed down, and we do not have any choice but to receive it. Our response, of course, is up to us, but our choices are always limited by the roa gzeirah, by the severity of the decree. The music and the words of Unetane Tokef attempt to conjure the emotions of awe and fear, because those are the feelings when we receive one. Awe at the magnitude of the power that imposes itself on our lives, and fear at what it means for us going forward. Perhaps these feelings of awe and fear presented themselves this summer as the gzeirah emerged from the United States Supreme Court, ruling in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization that removed the constitutional right to abortion, overturning nearly 50 years of precedent established by Roe v. Wade and later Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Perhaps we felt awe that despite a vast majority of Americans believing that access to abortion ought to remain in place, a group of powerful justices can effectively take this right away in many parts of the country. And fear, we might have felt fear about what this will mean for the lives of so many who have, at least for the last 50 years, had the choice about when they become mothers, and in many cases only survived because that choice was in their hands. This ruling leaves us with very few options to protect and empower the bodies of those who bear children, and the need to protect them and to come to terms with the reality that those who believe in abortion access may not be able to stop this decree from doing what it was intended to do. As we grapple with this gzeirah, with this ruling and its implications, we are witness to a public debate that is couched in religious terms. But those religious terms do not account for the religious view of Jewish tradition. A particular Christian viewpoint has been put forth by the anti-abortion movement as the religious perspective on this question, and that is simply false. Judaism has a different take, and it's an important one to understand. Not only can it ground us personally as we, along with all other Americans, find ourselves pitching and turning in a sea of confusion and anger and danger because of this ruling, but because the Jewish perspective can also bring vital wisdom and reason to the national conversation and, God willing, hope for the future as well. Traditional Jewish thought, while far from being a bastion of women's rights, is quite progressive when it comes to reproductive health. Jewish law views abortion as a critical form of health care and a fundamental necessity for a moral society. This is because in the Torah and throughout halachic literature, the broad corpus of Jewish legal texts with which we have been endowed, a fetus is clearly considered to be part of the mother's body until it has been born. The rabbis compare it to her thigh, to emphasize that no one else can claim authority over it. Until the moment that its head has emerged and breath has been taken, a mother's life takes precedent over it. That is not to say that Judaism takes this issue lightly. It does not. Bringing life into the world is the fulfillment of the first commandment in the Torah, Peru urevu, umilu et haaretz, be fruitful and multiply and populate the earth. But our tradition takes an expansive view of what situations might arise that would create the need for the termination of a pregnancy. It might be because the mother's life is at risk, or because a pregnancy occurred because of an improper relationship, or because having another child will endanger the life of the children she already has. Or it might be another reason, a very broad category described as causing her great pain. And our rabbis even discuss mental and emotional well-being as important factors in the decision to have an abortion. Our tradition mentions both surgery and medication as acceptable methods. In the Bible and numerous halakhic treatises that expound upon Jewish law, in the most important religious texts in our tradition, the position that the mother's life takes precedence is reiterated again and again and again. It is not an aberrant view, but rather the dominant one. And so the logic that flows from it, that abortion access is important, is self-evident and steadfast. This clear prioritization of the life of the mother over the potential life of the fetus, this clear rejection of the idea that life begins at conception makes it absolutely necessary for abortion to be accessible. Preserving life is the highest religious obligation, and when someone is pregnant, until they are giving birth, only one actual life hangs in the balance. According to our tradition, religious freedom for Jews includes abortion access, without question. This stance is particularly clear when we look to Israel, a place where traditional Jewish law has informed the civil law codes. Israeli law supports reproductive freedom and has for decades. In most cases, abortion services are free in Israel. Furthermore, because Israeli society wants to encourage high birth rates and the expansion of families, an ethos formed by the hope of reconstituting the Jewish people after the Holocaust and other catastrophes, many incentives and support structures are available for people who wish to have children, including government-funded fertility treatments and child care benefits. Among those support structures is the access to abortion, because the society at large views abortion access as a necessary component of family planning. While we may not all be in complete lockstep about every situation in which abortion might be warranted, the Jewish world, with very few exceptions, is united in the belief that access to abortions is an important medical, moral, and ethical practice. Secondly, in the Summers opinion, authored by Justice Alito, he states that for the court to grant a right that is not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, it must be, quote, deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition, unquote. He reasons that because abortion access is not so rooted, it is not to be protected. For those who view the world through the lens of Reform Jewish philosophy, this argument is deeply offensive and utterly preposterous. The very foundation of our Reform Jewish philosophy is the recognition that our past, even our most sacred texts and cherished practices, occur in a historical context and are not infallible. We recognize the inherent biases and serious inequities that are baked into what came before, and it is incumbent upon us to correct them in order for society to progress. We are humbled but undaunted by this task, and we perceive ourselves as following in the footsteps of our great rabbinic tradition when we reinterpret and amend specific laws for the sake of approaching greater integrity to a broader principle. In Judaism, for example, gender separation and the relegation of women to certain spheres of life and not others is deeply rooted in history and tradition. Yet I am able to stand on this bema as a female rabbi because the Jews who came before me recognized that the exclusion of women from Jewish ritual and institutional leadership was an injustice and sought to remedy it by changing the rules that govern our communal life. By the way, other streams of Judaism, Reconstructionist, conservative, and even parts of the Orthodox world came to the same conclusion. Our movement's commitment to gender equality, to LGBTQ equality, to anti-racism, even our commitment to the existence of the state of Israel as a modern nation, in addition to a spiritual idea, all represent a reconsideration of viewpoints deeply rooted in our people's history and tradition. To bind ourselves to unjust practices because it is what we've always done flies in the face of the way Reform Judaism seeks to affect the world. And this philosophical grounding of the court's gezerah is, through Reform Jewish eyes, an ethically reckless and morally abhorrent reading of history. Reform Jewish philosophy teaches that we can respect history and tradition and at the same time refuse to be held hostage by it. Finally, we know from our spiritual and religious life, from our lived experience in our world, that some gezerot come to pass even when we wish they wouldn't. That is what Unetane Tokef is all about. We do not always live in the world that we ourselves would choose. But this piyut, that is the essence of our high holiday liturgy, continues with those striking words that we also sung today. Uteshuva, utefila, utzdaka, mavirin et roa gzera. Repentance, prayer, and charity do not obliterate the decree, but they can, as Rabbi Silverman preached on Rosh Hashanah, ma'avirin et roa gzera. They can lessen the burden of the decree, reduce the severity of the decree, and bring a sense of purpose and peace into the lives of all of us as we receive and respond to our fate, whatever it is. These words we sing throughout this season are not words of surrender, but words of resolve. The teaching reminds us that even in the midst of a ruling we object to with every fiber of our being, we do have a path forward. We always have choices. Teshuvah, repentance. This asks us to look at where we fell short. When did we stop paying attention and become complacent? When did we forget to vote? Have we avoided sharing our views or our stories for the sake of avoiding an uncomfortable conversation, thereby creating a vacuum of understanding about how important this issue is? Whose pain did we ignore so that this issue and many others lost its sense of urgency? Have we closed our eyes to the plight of women and those who bear children, especially poor women, women of color, centering only our own experience and our own capabilities? How often have we fallen into the trap our society has laid for us over generations, the trap of believing that women and their pain and their struggles and their health and well-being is somehow a sideshow to the real arena of history instead of the very essence of it? And what steps must we take to be sure that we don't make those same mistakes again on this or another important matter? That is the essence of teshuvah, and we can do that. Tefillah, prayer. Let us take the confusion and pain and anger and frustration we may feel and process it mindfully through sacred words and sacred practices. As our Shabbat prayer book says, prayer may not water an arid field, but it can water an arid soul. Mend a broken heart, rebuild a weakened will. Let us not forget to come to this well, so that we can fortify ourselves for what lies ahead. We will need every ounce of spiritual strength we can muster to look this reality in the face and respond to it over the long term. Tzedakah, acts of righteousness. There have already been many who have been affected by this gzera. Practitioners and patients have found themselves in horrific situations because of the confusion it has caused. And as is always the case, while we are all in the same storm, we are not, as they say, in the same boat. Those with resources and strong social networks will fare better, even in the worst situations. Those without resources, without a strong network, who have little or no flexibility or mechanism to travel or miss work, will be the ones who bear the heaviest ro'ah gzera, the heaviest burden of this ruling. And they will need support from the rest of us. Our generosity and commitment will be essential. Let us not hold back from sharing what is ours, whether it is money, time, status, access. Every bit of it is tzedakah, the moment calls for, as we support individuals whose lives are already and will be devastated by this ruling, and the organizations that seek to empower them and alleviate their suffering. It would be an understatement to say it is a turbulent time. It would be remiss not to mention that everywhere we look, contentious conversations are taking place around what the future of our country should be. As a Jewish community, we are a part of that, affected by it, and have something important to bring to it. Our Jewish religious texts speak loudly about this and other important issues of the day. Our Reformed Jewish philosophy about change and progress is an important perspective to bring to the table, and our spiritual practices address fraught moments such as this one. And one more thing. We, as a Jewish community, love this country. Never in our history, never have we enjoyed a safety and prosperity such as we have known in the United States. Until the founding of this country, our people always had been subject to the whims of a ruler, be it a king, an emperor, a sultan, tsar, or pope. And whether we could remain in our homes or were expelled, whether we lived or we died, was entirely dependent on whether that ruler thought he could benefit by allowing us to live. No matter where we were, even if our presence was tolerated, we were scorned throughout the ages. It was not until George Washington's letter to the First Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island in 1790 that any world leader spoke to the Jewish community with such a recognition of our humanity. President Washington famously said, quote, "It is now no more that toleration is spoken of as if it were the indulgence of one class of people, that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, may the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be no one to make him afraid." End quote. With 340 words written by newly elected President Washington, we, the Jews of this country, knew our world and the course of Jewish history had changed. And we could begin to dream of doing more than staying alive and remaining in our homes. We could dream of being active, fully participating citizens whose voice and unique perspectives could shape, were invited to shape this land. So despite all its faults, and in full awareness of all the ways that the United States has fallen short, and never forgetting that other groups, and particularly enslaved Africans and their descendants, received no such letter from our founding fathers, our appreciation for this country as a Jewish community and our belief in its stated principles is strong. Our protest about this and other important matters is an act of patriotism. As you may know, I was blessed to spend time in Jerusalem this summer with a think tank called the Shalom Hartman Institute. I participated in a rabbinic seminar with over 150 other rabbis from around the world and across movements and streams of Judaism. And we spent hours every day learning together and contemplating the future of Israel and the Jewish people as a whole, including having the opportunity to learn from Arab Palestinians as well as Jewish Israelis. I was reminded through these days about one of Israel's most remarkable traits, the way that it wrestles openly with its own identity and character, true to its name. Because Jewish culture has shaped the national character, the political conversations take on the tone of a Talmudic discourse. Arguments, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of approaching truth and righteousness, are voiced in every pocket of society, including popular culture. The poetry and songs of Israel are often political, often voicing a deep unsettledness and even fury about the direction of the country or its policies, while at the same time being love songs to it. Protest is widely viewed as an act of love and commitment. One such song is Ein li eretz acheret, I have no other country, written in 1982 in response to the Lebanon War, which many Israelis felt at the time was a catastrophic step in the wrong direction for their country. Renowned lyricist Ehud Manor wrote the words, and composer Corinne Alal wrote its music. Manor died in 2005, and Alal is still creating music as well as being an LGBTQ activist and international ambassador of the Complex Voice of Israel. And this is a translation of the words of that song. I have no other country, even when my country is burning. Just a word in my language pierces my veins and my soul. With a pained body, with a hungry heart, I declare that this is my home. I will not stay silent when my country has changed her face. I will not give up on her. I will remind her. I will sing into her ears until she opens her eyes. These are the words with which I would like to close on this Yom Kippur morning. This country is our home, and we love it. And because we love it, we do not stay silent when it turns away from a righteous path. Rather, we lean in closer, remind, shout, protest, vote, vote, and vote, and sing in its ear that we know who it intended to be, who it can yet be. That od lo avda tikvatenu, we have not yet, nor will we ever lose our hope. Ein li eretz acheret, גם אם אדמתי בוערת, רק מילה בעברית חודרת אל אורכי, אל נשמתי, בגוף כואב, בלב רעב, כאן הוא ביתי. לא אשתוק כי עצי שינתה את פניה, לא אוותר לה אזכיר לה, ואשיר כאן באוזניה, עד שתפקח את עיניה. I will sing into her ears until she opens her eyes. Good Yantif.